The morning Marcus Webb returns to Sycamore Street. The temperature is 31 degrees, and the oak trees have shed everything they had to give. He is wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that costs more than the monthly rent on the apartment where he once slept on a pull-out sofa with a broken spring that left a permanent scar along his left shoulder blade. His car, a black Mercedes S-Class, being the kind with the heated seats and the ambient lighting that shifts color depending on your mood, idles at the curb while he sits behind the wheel and does not move. He has been sitting here for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He knows because he has been watching the dashboard clock the way a man watches something he is afraid might disappear if he looks away. He can see the light on in the kitchen window of 4412 Sycamore, the one with the yellow curtains. The curtains have been there for 11 years. He knows this because he remembers the afternoon Della Watkins hung them, standing on a step stool in bare feet, humming something low and wordless to herself, while he sat at her kitchen table eating a bowl of soup she had made from scratch, because she said canned soup was a kindness tax, meaning you paid extra for the convenience of someone caring less. That was one of Della's expressions. A kindness tax. She had 100 of them. A whole private economy of phrases she had built over 73 years of living in a world that frequently charged her too much and paid her too little. Marcus sits in his Mercedes and looks at the yellow curtains and understands, in a way that is almost physical, that he has been afraid of this moment for 3 years. Not afraid it would not happen, afraid of what it would mean when it did, because the promise was real. He made it on the worst night of his life, sitting at that kitchen table with $2.11 in his pocket and an eviction notice folded in his jacket and a dignity so tattered he could barely hold it around himself. And Della Watkins had put a bowl of beef stew in front of him, without being asked and without looking at him with anything that resembled pity. And he had looked at her and said the thing that was in his heart, because in that moment he had nothing left to offer except the truth of what he intended. "I'm going to marry you when I'm rich," he had said. He was 34 years old. She was 67. He said it the way some people say a prayer, not as a transaction, not as a joke, as a covenant between himself and the version of himself he had not yet become. She had looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup and said, "Boy, eat your stew." That was 11 years ago. He is 45 now. She is 78. He has thought about the arithmetic of this many times in the last 3 years, since the company he co-founded was acquired for an amount of money the business press described as eye-watering, and he sat in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan with lawyers on all sides and thought, Della Watkins fed me soup when I had nothing. He thought about it in the car back to his apartment. He thought about it at the closing dinner where everyone toasted his name. He thought about it at 3 in the morning for 1,047 consecutive mornings, which is how he knows that 3 years is not a comfortable distance from a promise, but an impossible one, and that the reason he waited so long to come back was not that he forgot, but that he understood, in the way you understand something that costs you something to understand, that Della Watkins deserved to be approached correctly, not impulsively, not with the first flush of money, but with intention, with the kind of deliberateness she herself had always shown. He steps out of the car. The cold air takes his breath for a moment and then gives it back. He walks up the front path, which is cracked in the same place it was cracked 11 years ago, a diagonal fracture across the third concrete square that Della has filled with a thin bead of flexible sealant, the kind of pragmatic repair that keeps something functional without pretending it is new. He notices this. He notices everything about this house the way you notice things you have memorized in the dark. He rings the doorbell. Inside, he can hear movement, the specific sound of slippered feet on hardwood, the rattle of the chain guard being engaged first. Della has always engaged the chain guard first, a habit from decades of living alone and knowing that caution is not paranoia but mathematics. And then the door opens 3 inches and one eye appears. It's dark brown and sharp and not remotely diminished by 78 years of continuous use. That eye looks at him for a long moment. Then the door closes. The chain disengages. The door opens fully. Della Watkins is wearing a housecoat, the color of dried lavender, and her reading glasses are pushed up on her head like a headband, and she is looking at Marcus Webb with an expression that contains approximately 11 distinct emotional registers simultaneously, and which is an expression that only people who have lived a great deal are capable of producing. "Marcus," she says. Her voice is exactly as he remembered it, low and unhurried, like water that knows where it is going. He says, Miss Della. His voice does something complicated on the second word. He clears his throat. She looks at him for another long moment. Then she steps back and says, "Well, come in then. You're letting the heat out." He follows her inside. The house smells like coffee and something baking and a particular kind of clean that is not the clean of products, but the clean of consistent care, the smell of a place that has been tended for decades by someone who believed that a home was something you owed attention to. The kitchen is exactly as he remembered it. The yellow curtains, the round table with 4 chairs, though Della lives alone. The ceramic rooster on the counter she has had for at least 30 years. Was the photograph on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like a peach, the photograph of her son Raymond, who died in 2008, which is a fact Marcus knows because Della told him about Raymond the second time he sat at this table, not as a performance of grief, but as an introduction, as though Raymond was still someone you needed to meet. She pours 2 cups of coffee without asking. She sets his in front of him the same way she has always set things in front of people, without ceremony. We are as though the gesture of giving is so natural, it requires no framing. She sits across from him. She says, "You look expensive." He says, "I look like someone who got lucky." She says, "Luck is what hard work looks like from the outside." He almost smiles. There it is, that private economy of phrases. He wraps both hands around the coffee cup. The ceramic is warm in the specific way that only homemade coffee in a real mug can be warm, which is not the scalding uniform heat of a chain, but the particular warmth of something prepared by a specific person for a specific other person, and the specificity of it hits him somewhere behind the sternum. He says, "I came back because I made you a promise." She says, "You made a lot of promises to yourself on this table. I was just the table." He says, "That's not true." She looks at him. She does not look away. He says, 11 years ago, you fed me when I had nothing. You never once made me feel like nothing. You never looked at me like a charity case or a burden or a temporary problem to be managed. You looked at me like a person. And when I said what I said, I wasn't making a joke or a metaphor. I meant something real by it. Maybe not exactly the words, but something real. The kitchen is very quiet. Outside, a car passes on Sycamore Street. The refrigerator hums. Raymond smiles from under the peach magnet. He says, "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. I'm not here to be strange about this. I know you're 78, and I know I'm 45, and I know that what made sense in a moment of desperate gratitude 11 years ago might not make sense now. But I am here because I made a promise, and the kind of man I decided to become keeps his promises. And because you deserve to know that you mattered, that what you did mattered, and that there is a person sitting in front of you whose life bent differently because of what you gave him at this table. Not just the food, the way you gave it." She is quiet for a long time. Then she says, "Marcus Webb." He says, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "I fed you soup because you were hungry. That's all. That's the whole of it." He says, "I know." She says, "And you built a whole company and sold it, and drove up in a car that cost more than this house, and came back here because of soup." "Yeah," he says, "because of you." She looks at him. Her eyes are doing all 11 of those things at once again. She picks up her coffee cup and holds it in both hands, the way he's holding his, and for a moment they are mirror images of each other across the round table, and the symmetry of it is not lost on either of them. She says, "You're a foolish man." He says, "I've been called worse." She says, "I know you have. I know because you told me. And you sat right there and told me every worst thing that had happened to you because you had nothing left to protect. And I will tell you what I told you then, which is that none of that was your fault, and all of that was survivable, and you were going to be fine." He says, "You were right." She says, "I'm usually right." He says, "I know that too." She sets her coffee down. She straightens in her chair. She is a small woman, has always been a small woman. But there is something in the way she occupies space that makes the word small feel inadequate, like calling a river a trickle because you can see the bottom. She says, "What exactly are you asking me, Marcus?" He reaches into the inside pocket of the charcoal wool overcoat. He sets a small box on the table, not jewelry, a square envelope. Inside the envelope, as she will later discover, are 2 things. The first is a letter, 4 pages handwritten. and in which he has tried to articulate with the precision he applies to everything he values exactly what she gave him, and exactly what she means to him, and exactly what he is proposing, which is not something reckless or presumptuous, but something considered and offered with open hands, subject entirely to her judgment. The second thing in the envelope is a document from the foundation he established 3 years ago, naming a scholarship fund. The fund is named for Raymond Watkins. It provides full support for young people from Sycamore Street and the 4 blocks surrounding it to attend technical school or community college or 4-year university, their choice. The first class of recipients, 8 young people between the ages of 17 and 22, has already been selected. 2 of them are currently enrolled. Their photographs are paperclipped to the document. When he says, "I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my time trying to be the kind of person you always treated me like I could be." The kitchen is quiet. Della Watkins looks at the envelope on the table. She does not pick it up. She says, "The soup wasn't alone." He says, "I know." She says, "I didn't feed you so you'd come back." He says, "I know that too." She says, "But you came back anyway." He says, "Yes." She picks up the envelope. She turns it over in her hands. She does not open it yet. As she holds it the way you hold something you understand is heavier than it looks. She says, "Raymond would have liked you." He says, "I'd have liked to know him." She says, "He was foolish too, in the best way." The refrigerator hums. Outside the yellow curtains, the oak trees on Sycamore Street stand bare, impatient, in the cold. They have been standing here longer than the houses. They will be standing after. They have watched things happen on this street that no one recorded and no one witnessed and no one will ever know except the trees, and they have the particular dignity of things that endure without requiring acknowledgement. Della Watkins sets the envelope down and looks at the man across her kitchen table. She has looked at a great many people across this table over 73 years of feeding whoever was hungry. She has fed her children and their children and neighbors and strangers, and once a young man who showed up at her door in November with $2.11 and a destroyed dignity that he was holding together with nothing but the intention to be better. She looks at him now. He is better. She can see it not in the coat or the car, but in the way he is sitting, which is the way a person sits when they have made peace with what they came from without pretending it didn't cost them anything. That is a hard posture to arrive at. She knows because she has been sitting that way her entire life. She says, "Open-ended question, Marcus." He says, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "If I had not fed you that night, if I had looked through the peephole and seen a man I didn't know and not opened the door, what then?" He is quiet for a moment. When he thinks about this the way he thinks about things that matter, which is completely without protecting himself from the discomfort of the answer, he says, "I don't know. I like to think I would have found a way. But I was so close to the edge that night. I was close to deciding that the edge was where I belonged. So, honestly, I don't know." She nods slowly. This answer satisfies her in a way that a more confident answer would not have. She has always preferred the truth of uncertainty to the lie of certainty, because she knows that certainty is usually something people perform for other people's comfort rather than their own accuracy. She says, "I opened the door because you had kind eyes." He says, "I didn't feel very kind that night." She says, "Kindness isn't a feeling. It's a structure. It's built into how a person is made. You had it even then. Especially then, because it survived everything that was trying to take it from you." He doesn't say anything. He can't, quite for a moment. She opens the envelope. She reads the letter first. She reads it slowly, the way she reads everything, with her reading glasses down from her forehead and her coffee cooling beside her and her full attention given over to the words. Because Della Watkins believes that reading something someone has written for you is an act of respect, and that skimming is a form of dismissal. He watches her read and does not rush her, and does not watch her face, because he understands that this moment belongs to her and that his role right now is to be still. She reaches the document. She looks at the photographs of the 8 young people. She is quiet for a long time. Then she says, "Raymond." Just that. Just the name. But the name contains about 40 years of love and grief and motherhood and loss and the specific texture of loving someone who is gone, which is not the same as forgetting them, but is not the same as having them either. And it exists in a space between those two conditions that has no good name in English, though it probably has one in other languages that have thought longer about what loss looks like from the inside. She sets the document down very carefully. She takes her glasses off. She does something with her face for a moment that is private, and Marcus looks at the yellow curtains, because some moments are not yours to witness, even when you are in the room. Then she puts her glasses back on, and she looks at him, and her face has resolved into something clear and decided. She says, "You named it right." He says, "It was the right name." She says, "Yes, it was." She picks up her coffee. She drinks it. She sets it down. She says, "Marcus, I am 78 years old, and I have had one great love, and I buried him 32 years ago, and I have made my peace with what my life is and what it contains, and I am not in the market for what you might be imagining." He says, "I understand." She says, "But..." He waits. She says, "I have been alone in this house for a long time, and I have been fine. I am good at fine, but fine is not the same as full." He says, "No, it's not." She says, "I am not your mother. I want to be clear about that." He says, "You're not my mother." She says, "And I am not some symbol of something you need to save or redeem or come back to in order to complete a story about yourself." He says, "You're not that either." She says, "Then what am I?" He says, "You're Della Watkins, who fed me soup, who has kind eyes herself even though I never told her, who has a son named Raymond who deserved to be remembered out loud, who is sitting across from me right now and is the most real thing in my life." Which is a strange thing to say about someone I haven't seen in 11 years, but is completely true. She looks at him. He looks back. Outside, something shifts in the light. The winter sun moves behind a cloud and then back out again, and the kitchen fills for a moment with a pale gold light that comes through the yellow curtains and makes everything in the room look like something that is being preserved, like an archive, like a place where something important happened, and the light knows it. When Della Watkins says, "There's stew in the pot," Marcus Webb says, "I know. I could smell it from the door." She says, "It'll be ready in an hour." He says, "I'm not going anywhere." She says, "No, I don't expect you are." She stands and goes to the stove, and he sits at the table in the same chair. He sat in 11 years ago, and for a moment, the two versions of himself, the man with $2.11 and the man in the charcoal wool coat, exist in the same chair simultaneously, or else in the distance between them is both enormous and nothing at all. Because here is the thing about Sycamore Street, here is the thing about yellow curtains and round tables and bowls of soup given without ceremony to people who need them. These things do not disappear when you leave. They travel with you. They are the infrastructure of a life, invisible and load-bearing. The thing you discover is holding everything up only when you try to imagine what would have held you without it. He picks up his coffee cup. It is still warm. In the kitchen of 4412 Sycamore Street, on a cold morning in a month, with no promises left to make because all of them have finally been kept, a pot of stew comes slowly to the temperature of a thing that will sustain you, and a woman who asked for nothing hums something low and wordless to herself. Paitian, a man who came back because that is who he decided to be, watches the yellow curtains and thinks about how the oak trees on this street were here before everything and will be here after, and how some things you choose to build in your life are made of money, and some are made of something that has no price because it was never for sale, and which kind of thing you spend your days building is the only question that has ever really mattered, and that the answer, always, when you trace it back far enough, begins with an open door and a bowl of soup, and someone who looked at you and saw not what you were, but what you had in you to become, and loved that thing enough to feed it, and asked for nothing in return, and in asking for nothing, gave you everything. She ladles the stew. The ceramic bowls are the same ones she has always used, blue with a small white rim, the kind of dishes that are not fashionable but are good, Bijal, the way the best things in a life are rarely fashionable but are good, solid, and reliable and warm in your hands and present every single time you reach for them. She sets the bowl in front of him. She sits across from him. She says, "Eat." He does. The stew is the best thing he has tasted in 11 years. He does not say this. He does not need to. She can see it in the way he eats, which is the way a person eats when food is not fuel, but recognition. When the act of being given something nourishing by someone who means it reaches a place in you that nothing expensive has managed to reach, and you understand all over again that the richest you have ever been was not the day the acquisition closed, but every single day someone who owed you nothing chose to give you something anyway. He eats. She watches him. She picks up her own spoon. Raymond smiles from the refrigerator. The yellow curtains hold the light. Sycamore Street goes on in both directions, doing what streets do, carrying people from where they were to where they are trying to get to. And sometimes, if a street is very old and the trees on it are very patient, it carries them back to where they started so they can see it correctly this time, see what it actually was and what it actually gave them, and say so, out loud, to the person who deserves to hear it. The oak trees know this. They have always known this. They have been waiting, whereas in the particular patient way of things that root themselves in one place and endure for this exact morning, this exact light, this exact moment of a man returning to a table where someone once believed in him before he had given them any reason to. This is not a love story. Or rather, it is a love story, but love is a larger house than most people's blueprints allow for, and what lives in this kitchen is one of the rooms that house contains, the room where someone was seen, fully, without negotiation, at their worst and most desperate, and not turned away, and carried that being seen forward into every subsequent room of their life, and built something with it, and came back to say, what you did was the foundation. I just built on top of it. And foundations are not acknowledged the way walls are acknowledged, or roofs are acknowledged, but nothing stands without them. And I wanted you to know that you are the reason something stands. And that is what Marcus Webb came back to say. And Della Watkins, who already knew, who has always known, because people who give the way she gives always know on some level that what they are doing matters even when no evidence arrives to confirm it. Even when the soup is eaten and the person leaves and the years pass and the curtains stay yellow and the stew stays on the stove, Della Watkins sits across from him with her spoon in her hand and decides, in the way she decides things, which is quietly and completely and without drama, that she will let him stay. Not because she needs him, because he needs to be somewhere that remembers who he is beneath the coat and the car and the acquisition and the foundation and the success. Somewhere that knew him when he was just a man with kind eyes and a broken spirit and $2.11 and the intention to be better. She can be that place for him. She has always been that place for everyone who found their way to her table. Some of them came back, most didn't. She fed them anyway, but this one came back and brought Raymond's name with him. And that, Della Watkins thinks, stirring her stew, that is a thing worth being present for on a cold morning in a month with bare trees and a cracked front walk and yellow curtains that have been hanging in the same window for 11 years, catching whatever light the world is willing to give. So she looks at Marcus Webb eating his soup. She thinks about what it costs a person to return, not the drive, the other thing, the willingness to be seen again by someone who knew you before, to offer up the fact of your success to someone who witnessed your failure, which requires a kind of courage that is different from the courage it takes to build something, quieter and more personal, and in many ways harder. He came back anyway. She says, without looking up from her stew, the scholarship. In the 8 kids, he says, yes, ma'am. She says, I want to meet them. He says, I was hoping you'd say that. She says, Raymond would have wanted them to know where the money came from. He says, I thought so too. She nods. She eats. He eats. The kitchen hums around them with the particular frequency of a place that has been filled with enough meals and enough honesty and enough of what people actually need to have developed its own kind of warmth, independent of the radiator, independent of the season, something that lives in the walls and the curtains and the ceramic rooster and the 4 chairs at the round table, 3 of which are always waiting. Outside, on Sycamore Street, the cold continues. Inside, it is warm. It has always been warm here. That is the whole of it. That is the story, not the Mercedes or the acquisition or the scholarship or the charcoal coat. The warmth, who made it, what it grew, who came back to stand in it again and say, this was real. And I did not forget, and I wanted you to know. You, watching this, listening to this, think about the tables in your life. Think about the people who set something in front of you without ceremony when you needed it. Think about the ones who looked at you with kind eyes when you had given them no reason to. Think about the doors that opened, the bowls that were filled, the voices that said, eat, without judgment, without transaction, without the expectation of return. And think about whether you have gone back. Think about whether you should, not because they need you to, not because it completes a story about yourself, but because the people who fed you when you were empty deserve to know that what they gave you grew into something, that the nourishment traveled, that you are standing somewhere better, partly because of what they set on a table in front of you and asked nothing for. Go back. If you can, tell them what grew. You bring the name of someone they loved. Eat the stew. That is all. That is everything.